Are you a high-performing parent, entrepreneur, or high achiever in pursuit of excellence? Welcome to The Nexus Podcast, a podcast custom tailored for families like ours, driven, affluent, and eager to lead extraordinary lives. From rockstar stay-at-home moms to high-producing CEOs, we choose to model success for everyone we are surrounded by. We prioritize health over sickness, embrace a vitalistic lifestyle, and seek to tap into the limitless potential that God has bestowed upon us. I'm Dr. Daniel Kimbley, your host, and on this podcast, we'll uncover the secrets to living a fulfilling and abundant life, where you and your loved ones can thrive physically, mentally, and spiritually. Together, we'll forge a path to greatness and unleash your God-given capabilities. Get ready to say yes to a life of true prosperity and well-being. This is The Nexus Podcast. Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. And this week on the podcast, I know I talked about it before and I just talked about it recently, but it's just too important for me to not share with you and chat about again. And that is this idea of the frontal cortex, and really something that I heard inside of my office a few weeks ago. And that was this, is that we had a group of people who we take care of, and I overheard the conversation is they are deciding to pause care for themselves for a little bit, which is totally fine. Like, we support everybody's journey in that. But the reason that they're pausing care is because they said, and this is what I overheard, right? They didn't say this directly to me, but what I overheard is that they're going to start using the HyperVolt on themselves instead of come to see us anymore. And you know, this sounds like a great idea, right? And I wish that were the reality, is that everybody could just use a HyperVolt and they would be able to affect the front part of their brain and they would be able to express life full out. But the reality is if that were true, then nobody would come and see us and we wouldn't be in business anymore. Because the fact of the matter is that the specific adjustments that we do inside of our office, they are done at a certain speed. And we know through all the research and all the neuroscience that in order to get an effect on the front part of the brain, the adjustment needs to be done at a certain speed. And that speed is 0.2 of a second. So faster than 0.2 of a second is fine, but when you get up above a certain speed, your brain can't process it the same way. And so the HyperVolt vibrates so insanely quickly that it's too much for the brain, and we actually don't get an effect on the frontal cortex. Now, the reason I share this with you is because I think of this concept, right? It's like everybody wants to try to be able to fix themselves, myself included. And I realize that, like, you know, I wish that when I was younger and Heather convinced me to go to a chiropractor that I didn't have to go. And I didn't have to go. I didn't go because I was in pain. I went because I learned about what's possible performance-wise. I learned what's possible for myself and my expression of purpose and passion and my connection to God-wise. And I truly believe that if it weren't for chiropractic care, then I wouldn't be connected to God in the way I am. I wouldn't be connected to my daughter Coco in the way that I am. I wouldn't be connected to my wife in the way that I am. So I share this with you because it frustrates me and it breaks my heart. Because when I hear somebody say that they're going to use a HyperVolt or they're going to use some other kind of therapy and that they don't need a chiropractor anymore, the reality is like that couldn't be further from true. And here's how I know this, is that one of the newest pieces of research that just came out that I've been looking at is by a woman named Heidi Havoc. And what she was measuring is there's this frontal N30 amplitude. So the frontal N30 amplitude is basically a wave. What we can measure is like, does that affect the frontal cortex of the brain? And remember that I always talk about the frontal cortex of the brain. You guys are probably tired of hearing me talk about it, but I would be doing undue justice if I didn't talk about it again, to just remind you that the frontal cortex of the brain is responsible for what makes us successful. It's responsible for our goal setting. It's responsible for sticking to the short-term things we need to be able to do to get those goals. It's responsible for our grit. It's responsible for our willpower. It's responsible for our determination. It's responsible for our curiosity and our creativity. It's responsible for our emotional intelligence. It's responsible for determining good versus bad and right versus wrong. All these things that make someone a successful human being come from the frontal cortex of the brain. And so when I hear someone say, they're like, we're not going to come anymore, we'll just use the HyperVolt, I'm like, it couldn't frustrate me more, because I know through all the neuroscience and all the research is that HyperVolt is going to feel great on the muscles and it's going to do nothing for the brain. And you got to remember that the brain tells the muscles what to do. Your brain is constantly controlling the tone of every single muscle in your entire body. Your muscles do not have a mind of their own. And so when I hear things like this, it frustrates me, but it also gets me like super excited and overjoyed, because I think about the fact of, you know, you hear these stories of like someone who hires a plumber, and all the plumber does is come in and bang on a pipe and it fixes everything, right? And the reality is like most people would look at it and be like, oh, well, I could have done it myself. But the thing that you pay the plumber for is because what the plumber knew that other person didn't know is they knew exactly where to bang on what pipe in order to get a certain result in the first place. And so banging on pipes, banging on your spine is great all day long, but it's not going to get a change in your brain. And so eventually it just becomes a waste of time. And the same thing is true like in any context, right? Is that you pay an expert to do something for you because that expert has a training and a specificity involved that can get you a result that you otherwise couldn't get on your own. And when I talk about this newest piece of research that Heidi just came out with in the frontal N30 amplitude is what she found is that when we adjust joints of the spine that do not need adjusted, we do not get an effect on that frontal N30 amplitude. So what does this mean? It means that if you are not seeing a chiropractor who is highly trained to determine exactly where to adjust you, then you're throwing your money down the drain. If you are one of those people who sit and you're like, oh, I'll just pop my own neck and that's how I get adjusted, that's not an adjustment. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy, and you're probably creating more harm than you are good because the whole point of chiropractic care in the first place is to affect the frontal cortex of the brain. Your frontal cortex of your brain is what allows you to express life. It turns off your pain signals. It controls your digestion. There's so many things that the frontal cortex is responsible for. And like I share this with you because I'm just passionate. I get fired up about it. It's like when people say, like this is so expensive. It's like, what's the alternative? Like, is it more expensive to go down the route of medication and be addicted to meds later? Or is it more worth it to pay for it on the front end so that you have long-lasting results inside of your life because you actually address the thing that connects you to life in the first place? You actually address the thing that controls and turns off and on the stress response, which ultimately, if you're stressed out or if your body's stuck in a stressed out state, that's where your symptoms come from in the first place. It's not because you're broken. The coolest thing is that every single one of us has the exact same potential to be healthy, to be successful, to be vital, to be vibrant, to live at 100% and express life full out. The front part of the brain is responsible for our faith, for our hope, for our optimism, for our purpose, for our passion, for our power. And the reality is that if you have the frontal cortex of your brain that's functioning less than, then you can't express life the way that you dream of expressing it. And it's not because you're broken, but it's because in a fight or flight or stressed out state, you don't need to express purpose. You need to express safety. In a fight or flight state, you don't need to express passion. You need to express aggression. In a fight or flight state, you don't need to set long-term goals and think about the future. You need to worry about the next threat that's immediately in front of you. So when people come into me and they have these issues of like, I'm unmotivated, I don't feel like I can set goals, I don't feel like I can hit my goals, I feel disconnected from my family, it's like, yeah, those are all a result of a weakened, not functioning frontal part of the brain. And so I share this with you again to say that like you can't get those kind of changes in your body. You can't get those kind of changes in your brain by rubbing a HyperVolt up and down your back. And this is what the research shows, right? Is that segments that don't need adjusted literally have no effect on that frontal N30 amplitude. And this is what we are highly trained to do in our office. Just like the example of the plumber I shared with you. Just like so many other examples of like an electrician, right? Is like they just have a different level of knowledge and a different level of skills that are specific so that you can get results that you're really looking for. So my friends, my question for you is this, is like, where are you looking for a global approach? A one and done, big picture approach, but not focusing on the specifics, because ultimately the specifics matter so much, and in terms of chiropractic care, they matter more than anything based on the most current research that's out there. And for all the haters who are like, oh, it's not double-blind placebo, this study actually was. And so I just share that with you. I'm gonna put the link in the show notes if you wanna read it for yourself. It's a super cool study, it's heady because it's neuroscience-y, but that's what I love and that's where I live. So my friends, I love you, I appreciate you, I hope you got some value out of this episode, and I will come at you again next week. God bless you, peace.